4 Saturdays, days when you could be doing a lot of other things with a lot of other people, you have chosen to invest time in iLead, and we are truly humbled by that and grateful for it. And as we prepare for our final plenary session, I have a question, because it's been fascinating to me as I've talked with Emmanuel people over the last couple of months, how many of them had not been in other churches. So let me ask this question. I want you to raise your hand if this is the first time you've been in Holy Cross Sanctuary. It's amazing to me. That's awesome. And I had that same experience at St. Peter's. St. Michael for us is kind of a no-brainer because of our shared ministry, but just the fact of getting into our churches, it broadens our view of the church and our mission in this community. And it's really great to be together today at Holy Cross. Thank you. I know they're probably still greeting people, but to those who put together a wonderful spread for us today. I want to, just before we begin, I want to give a basic review of what we have been about over the last couple of months. And we have been doing something we don't do very often or very well, and that's work together. This has been a wonderful experience, collaborative experience between 4 congregations. And the motivation behind this, speaking as one of the pastors, is desperation seems like a strong word to use. But we recognize the need that we have for leaders and leadership development. And so iLead was designed to really speak to 2 different audiences. One, and most of you are part of this audience, one is a group of leaders who is already engaged or over years has contributed to one of our 4 ministries. And this is, for us, a continuing education piece. So John Nunez and Brian Friedrich and Robin Dougal and today Angie and Doug are helping us grow as leaders. The other group, and they're also represented here today, is a group of emerging leaders, new leaders, some for the first time being asked to serve in a congregational ministry. And not only are they part of these plenary sessions, they're also doing some targeted leadership development in the off weeks. And those, speaking for Emmanuel, have been tremendously energizing. And it's been really exciting to see this group not only coming together, but investing time in preparing to be leaders in our congregations. And this is not, for us, a one-time experience. We see iLead having great potential moving forward, and we're going to talk about that at the end of today's presentation. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce our host, Pastor Dan Harrington from Holy Cross. And Dan, I don't know how I would preach in this sanctuary. I'm trying to think, do people walk down the aisle? Only on Monday nights, okay. Dan, thanks for hosting us, and Dan's going to introduce today's speaker.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, we're very glad that you guys are here with us today. We hope you enjoy our facility. With that, I've been instructed I need to tell you where the restrooms are, because it's not immediately obvious. And so if you need to use either the men's room or the ladies' room, you're welcome to go out of here, down the hall, and immediately on the right side, you'll see the ladies' room and then the men's room. So they are there for you. Also, we want to say thank you to our hosts this morning who have put on this wonderful spread that was before you as you came on. I encourage you as you're leaving out of here to grab something, maybe fellowship a little bit and take advantage of that, because it's a wonderful blessing that they've given us this morning. And so with that, I get the opportunity to introduce our speakers this morning. We have Angie Mollering and Doug Schwartz with us this morning. And Angie is actually the Chief Operating Officer, or ex-CEO, of Lutheran Social Services, CEO and President of that organization. She's got over 30 years of experience in the social services sector, had various leadership positions on different boards and such. She's actually taught around the country, different states and their universities about these areas. And so a leading lady from here right in Fort Wayne. And so we're blessed to have her this morning sharing about building teams. Also, Doug Schwartz, he's a lifelong member of St. Paul Lutheran Church. 35 years in the U.S. Air Force. He was a colonel and a pilot. Doug led bases of people. If you have any military experience, this is thousands of people with varying interests in one tight little location that all have to live together and get along and keep the mission focused and move forward. And so wonderful experience there with leadership, but also with building teams. And so we're very excited to have both of them with us this morning and to share in this important area of leadership, and that's building teams. But before we have them come forward, I'd like to open us with a word of prayer. So please pray with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you that your hand has been in this these past couple months. We can see along the way that you've brought leaders into positions and places to make this whole thing move forward. We're thankful that you stir up the hearts of your people and you take their life experiences and you bring them to bear on your ministry in your church for the good of your kingdom and for the gospel message. We ask that there be open ears and hearts today. We ask a blessing on Angie and Doug as they share from their hearts and from their experience. And we pray that all of this would edify you and your Son and be for your glory. We ask this all in Jesus' saving name. Amen. Okay.
Thank you, Pastor. So another dynamic that really wasn't in our bios is Doug is also my board member. So technically he's my boss, right? So, and I've told him if he talks too long, I'm going to walk toward him and nudge him on. So that's an interesting dynamic, right? I'm instructing somebody who's in charge of me. So, but I think we can do this, right?
You bet.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to keep us on track today here a little bit. Doug and I have a lot of things we want to share in a short amount of time. We have some tools and some real practical boots on the ground experience that we bring, as Pastor said. And so we want to give you some of those tools. Some of them you may use, some of them may be guides, and others you may lay aside. But that's kind of what we want to do today is guide in a tangible way. And as Pastor Egel said, you know, many of you are veteran leaders in different walks of life, different areas. Many of you have led in the church. But I think one of the biggest questions we've gotten as people knew we were talking about building a team, they're like, I know how to build a team over here in my work setting, but what I'm not sure about is how do I build a team and guide a team and instruct a team in a ministry setting, because the dynamics are a little different. So hopefully we can talk and give some real good examples about that today. And then some of you are here because you were asked by your pastor or your church staff to be here and you would never say no to them, but you're still a little on the fence. Right? Like, what is this thing? You hear the laughter? Clearly, that's a feeling out there. So hopefully today, as we walk through this and talk through this, you start to get a vision of what this piece of it, the building the team piece, looks like. And then as your individual churches frame it up from your church perspective, you'll have a better idea of what this looks like going forward. So one of the things, and Pastor Egel touched on this, is that lay leadership is key to the future of your church, of our church in general in the United States. What did you say? Desperation? Did you start?
Yeah.
But we're feeling that, right? We were feeling that we need to work in this together and engage everyone in our churches as we move forward. That pastoral staff alone, ministry staff cannot do this. There are many needs. There are so many things in our congregation and many moving parts, and we want to engage everyone. We don't want someone to come to our church and feel like they're not connected and then not return. So there's some things only pastors can do. You know, the sacraments, the preaching, spiritual leadership of the congregation. And then you have church staff. You're fortunate in many of your churches that you have multiple church staff. You have people that are managing and moving forward many aspects. And so you have people driving that missional leadership, the discipleship ministry, youth, families, children, the administrative functions, community engagement. So many things are going on in your churches. And then this group that's here comes alongside to support and encourage and move things forward. this group of lay leaders to build teams to support, organize, and carry out ministries and functions of the church. Does that say what this was intended to do? So you have a group of leaders and planning committee that have been working on this because they say, yes, we see this need and we want to move forward with this. So this kind of frames up why you're here today. If the church is to thrive and to draw people in, this is a must. So I don't know how many of you ever heard your grandmother say, many hands make light work. And it was interesting that she always pulled this out and said this at the end of a big family meal when the dishes were piled up in the kitchen. So you knew what that meant, right? She was trying to enlist the troops to come into the kitchen and to help. And so that's what this is about. You're the hands and feet expanding the impact and the effectiveness of the church. And so Doug's got a lot of real life examples both in the Air Force, but also in church leadership.
Thanks, Angie. You know, as Angie said, pastors and staff can't do everything. They just can't. During my time as chairman of the Voters Assembly at St. Paul's, people would often come up and say, you know, Doug, we really need to do this, or the pastor really needs to do that. What I would put right back to them, okay, how can we help the pastor or the staff to get that accomplished? And then, of course, what would you get in return? Just crickets. And so what I would do then is encourage people, well, you've got a great idea. Let's form it up. Let's take it to the pastor. Let's collaborate on these things. And often these ideas would die on the vine, or they've been, perceived as been tried before. But you have to continue to re-engage. When people have an idea, something they're passionate about, harness that passion. Help the pastors, help the staff. I found it interesting if we would have a particular meeting, for example, on a Wednesday night, somebody would say, well, the pastor should be at that meeting, should be at our meeting, right? But I had to remind people, well, the pastor was a meeting on Monday night and Tuesday night. Oh, by the way, they have another meeting Thursday night. So we have to make sure that we're being good stewards of our pastors and our staff to ensure that they can continue to thrive and do the things that Angie mentioned that they need to do for us. So part of what we're going to talk about a little later, again, is more examples and really talk about just doing the ask. And I'll share some examples of where we've been successful with that.
Yeah. So many of you know that when the pastor looks you in the eye and walks toward you, you're like, okay, somebody's going to make an ask. Well, I'll tell you what, there are other people in this room that if they walk toward you and they look you in the eye, you get the same, like somebody's going to make an ask. That would be Doug and then Fred Nash. So if either one of them are walking toward you and looking you in the eye.
Watch out for that Fred guy, all right? Yeah.
Oh, no, it's good. We need everybody to do those kinds of things. Absolutely. So our goals for today are pretty clear, I think. Ideas and suggestions on how you can build your team. What are some tools? What are some things? Ways to organize and then foster your team. Because sometimes getting a team organized is one of the biggest challenges. What does everybody think their role is? And to reduce some of that confusion. And then we want to leave good time at the end for discussion and answering some questions. And Doug pointed out that many times when you do Q&A, people in the room have things that other people need to hear, either questions or comments. So that's going to be real important as we move forward. So like we've said, whether you're a pro at building teams or new to the idea, we all have to work on our leadership journey. So what's interesting as we were doing this, and oftentimes when you are going to speak on something, then God gives you some real life examples, and it's kind of like you're pointing the finger right at yourself. And that's been happening in my work life, but this is a journey and we're always learning. So I've said recently, I don't know that leadership ever gets any easier because it's a dynamic thing. People are dynamic, things are changing, we're adapting, and so we want to be on this journey together and have this conversation. And as this goes forward, using each other as resources is very important as we're candid about our experiences and challenges. So building the team. As leaders, it's important to ask ourselves, what do I focus on as the leader? What is my role? Sometimes you'll see a leader trying to do it all, carry everything. And that usually doesn't work because the leader needs to stay as the hub, as that center of the team. And there are certain things the leader focuses on. You own the project and the process. You'll keep the focus of the team, helping the members to stay on track. I often say at Lutheran Social Services, people always wonder, what do you do? A big part of my job is casting the vision, keeping people, keeping the mission, the impact statement out in front of people, and then keeping the team to center, right? I have to go and let teams do their thing, let leaders go do their thing, but my job is to make sure that we're staying on track to this end goal. And so that's a lot of what a leader does. Whether it's a task you're accomplishing, an event you're planning, or if you're chairman of the congregation, that's what leaders do, is kind of keep things on track, on the center of things. Defining the team's purpose and direction, so we don't want to shy away from that as leaders. I think this especially happens in ministry where it's this, what is the term? It's just this power of politeness. We're afraid to say it. We're afraid to be direct. And I always say to people, if you need me to do something, you just need to tell me. Like, don't beat around the bush. Don't say a bunch of nice things, because I may not pick up on it. So that ability to say, you're the leader, take confidence in the fact that you have the clearest sense of where your team needs to go, even though it doesn't feel like it, right? I know I've been before, like, okay, wait, where's my team? I think they're supposed to be following me. And so sometimes as a leader, it feels like that. But teams without a clear leader, somebody who does lead that team, they struggle. It's very difficult to do. So you can build a team, but if the leader isn't guiding and directing the team, then you get this. And I've started saying this more at work. I know everybody is busy, but as leaders, we need to make sure they're busy about the right things. What are they doing, the things that we need them to do in their role? And that's true on a team, because you'll find on teams, you set the trajectory, and then you have somebody over here that decides they're going to redecorate the lobby, okay? But really their job is to plan the VBS or whatever that is. So we all get off track, right? Because we get a good idea, we want to run with it. So yes, many hands make light work, but also those many hands need to be in that right direction. So we want to keep guiding and trust yourself as leaders to guide the team toward. And so then this is what we get, hopefully, right? Everybody going in the right direction. And if we would have had more time to create more slides, sometimes you get one arrow going off in a direction. It's okay as a leader to guide them and to bring them back. So you build the scaffolding for your team. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you build that scaffolding and give you some tools. So this sets a tone and defines where you're going. We suggest that your team is always built and that vision is cast in conjunction with either the lead pastor, the senior pastor at your church, or the church staff person that kind of sets this team on a trajectory. That there's some guidance. What is the intent of the team? Which is, I think, what you're asking. What is this going to look like? That staff person staying connected, setting that in motion. So before we end today, we're going to go over a couple tools which we've passed out and give you some sense of what are some things you can do. But Doug, you've led many teams in the church, so you're going to help us kind of frame up what could this look like? What are the options?
Thanks, Angie. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the different types of teams. Often when we think about developing leaders, it's for some significant event. It's a big capital campaign in a church or some other one-time event, kind of one-off, so to speak. But we need leaders to do the somewhat mundane stuff, the easy stuff, so to speak, the simple stuff. Somebody who's going to be in charge of making sure after a funeral that the dinner's prepared. The other person might serve on a property committee or a fund committee or something like that. Those are kind of those enduring positions, right? So let's talk first about the kind of the big capital campaign. During my tenure as chairman of the Voters Assembly, one of the challenges I had was that our long-serving senior pastor was retiring. So that was a big deal, and I needed to make sure we got the right people included on that call committee, correct? And my emphasis was I wanted to be inclusive rather than exclusive, right? So some people were critical. We've got a big call committee, Doug. We've got 15, 16 people. But inevitably, some people will have to drop off due to family or job concerns or other things that come up in their lives. But we made sure that we had the right people ready for that call committee. And that, you just don't all of a sudden wake up one morning, as I have a little silly Schwartzism of wake up over toast and coffee in the morning and say, I guess we'll just put a call committee together. A lot of those things need to happen way upstream. And that's why you're here today. We need to go out, and our charge is to get to know people in our congregation beyond just the people that we're all assembled with here. So I'm a lifelong member of St. Paul's. That kind of makes it easier, right? But I kind of understood different people and their different generations in the church and other things to put together what I thought was a really good call committee to call that pastor. Another example of like a one-time or one-off was a huge capital campaign that we had probably 18 years ago to renovate our school, which was built in 1913, right? It needed a lot of work. And so that was probably the best example that I've seen of people coming together and collaborating. We were able, with the help of a fundraising leader, to put together a whole bunch of teams to help do different projects, different aspects of that capital campaign. Because again, no one person, no one pastor, no one anybody can, of course, do all that work. Many hands make light work, as Angie said. So we have those things, but then we also have to always be looking out. If we're on the usher crew, we got to be looking for the next person. Hey, can you help us? Can you help us with the usher crew? And I will stress, you'll hear me stress later in this as well, that you have to do the ask. Don't be afraid to do the ask. That's not easy sometimes, right? It's not easy. We'll put something in the bulletin that says, we need 5 ushers, we need this, we need a cleanup crew. How many people respond to that? Maybe. Thank you. That was Zilcho. But if I go up to you and I say, Tom, Susie, can you help me with the cleanup after this? They're not going to tell you no. Now, I'm not, we're not going to stand over them with a sledgehammer. But typically, people just don't want to say no to you. And Angie talked about the pastors earlier. It's hard to tell a pastor no, don't I know? But we're all that way. But don't be afraid to do the ask. Kind of develop your own style to do the ask. And you'll find that people will respond in kind. I think sometimes in our congregations, we get in our little groups, so to speak. So one of the things I noticed at St. Paul's, and I'm sure it's in your congregations, really 3 things come to play as you're trying to get volunteers. First, they see the same people doing the same tasks all the time, right? And they think, they've got it. Tom, Susie, and Joey, they've got it. They don't need my help. Or Tom, Joey, and Susie are doing it, and they've got their own little group or clique. And we did see that in some of the responses about how do you kind of break up kind of these cliques, if you will. But they're not really. But the same people are comfortable with each other. They do it. They don't want me, okay? And the third thing, of course, is I don't have a skill that'd be useful for any of this. And we all know that's not true. So what's our charge to deal with all that? Do the ask, be inviting, try to move outside your own sphere of influence. I have a little ism I call everybody and everything gets stale. And sometimes we don't even realize it. That's when you have to sit there and say, maybe we've been doing it this same way for years, and maybe that's okay. Let's solicit some other people. Let's get some other people involved for good ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the key things I think that you said, Doug, was, when you talked about the campaign, the capital campaign at the church, is that there were multiple committees. So sometimes we look at one committee, this committee can take this on. As churches grow and as needs come to the top, as needs surface, you see that you have to get multiple committees going or multiple teams going. So let's talk a little bit more, and this is in your PowerPoint. That's one reason we gave you your PowerPoint slides, this is one of the things that you might be able to use, this set of questions. Because as we talked earlier, it's important that I define as the team lead, what am I going to do? What am I going to hold as my role? And then that helps us know who else to bring into the team. So the example that I'm going to use is something that is a little easier to picture, I think, in my mind, is I'm organizing a new member event. Okay, I've been charged as a team leader to organize a new member event. So one of the first things I need to think of is, what do I bring to the team? What's my role going to be in this? So I bring vision and the ability to motivate others. I'm the bridge of communication with that staff member at the church. Whoever has given me that charge, whoever's looked me in the eye and walked toward me on a Sunday morning, that might be my person. So I'm going to make sure they stay connected. And I'll make sure that the team members stay connected. That's part of the role of a team leader, is to make sure that team members are talking to each other when they need to, and that we're keeping the plans connected. So we don't have 2 or 3 people doing the same task unnecessarily. So what are my strengths and what do I bring? What am I best at? So I'm best at convening and engaging others as needed. So I've led teams before. So possibly I was in charge of the youth group event last year. So I'm going to take those skills and those experience and use them here. Or at work, I've organized an event. So those skills are transferable. I know that I lose details in the overall organization, and I'm better at overall vision. And so I need people who can help keep me on track in the small details, who think of things I'm not going to think of. Like, what are the table decorations going to be? Or, what do the invitations look like? And those kind of things. So I'm a good connector and engager at events. So as a team leader, then, I'm going to use my engagement and connection skills. So I'm going to make sure that event, then, that I'm not running around with the details, that I'm standing at the door when people enter, making sure the new members get connected. Because one of the other pitfalls of leaders, as I mentioned, we try to do it all. We try to do all the details. And then we're not in our best place when the event happens or as we roll out the duties. So what do I need as a team member then for this task at hand, this new member event? What complementary skill sets? This is something that I suggest you kind of sit down and think about. So I need 2 detail people who enjoy event planning and are strong with hospitality. That's what I would need. So also, I don't love, and I'm not really good at, fixing food for 30 people. I overbuy, I make it complicated. I need somebody who knows how to cook a meal for 30 people and is going to engage 2 or 3 other people to help make and serve the food. But I need somebody to kind of plan that piece. And I need 5 table hosts for the event that can engage people in conversation and make sure our new members get connected, not only at the event, but I want to make sure that they spot them the weeks after to get them connected in the church. So I don't know if this is helpful or this makes any sense when I'm saying this. Part of the struggle of being a team leader is we're doers. We're doer people, right? We get it done, and we pride ourselves. We got lists. Who's a list person? We got lists. We're crossing things out. If we did something that's not on the list, we put it on the list so we can cross it out. Anybody there? Yeah. So somebody comes to us and asks us to do something, we just dive right in. What we're suggesting is take a step back and say, okay, what should my role be in this? I can do that. Maybe some of you have a great idea for food for 30 people, but you're going to say, you know what? Over here, Sally, she does that really well. This is an opportunity to engage her so I can do what I do best.
One of the things that I had to learn as I moved along in my Air Force career was kind of shedding other duties, right? They were paying me to lead at a different level with each opportunity I had. And I was very fortunate to have a mentor, 2 really good mentors. I call them nuggets away. And the first one, when I was in college and I was working in a private sector, they had a vice president I still look up to today that I reported to. And one day we were walking in the facility and Steve says, "See John over there?" I said, "Yeah." He says, what do you see in John?" He said, "Well, I don't know, John's a nice guy and good supervisor, all that." He said, "He looks like me, doesn't he? He can be my brother." I said, "Yes." "His mannerisms are similar to mine, aren't they?" I said, "Yeah, they are." Kind of, "Where are we going with this, Steve?" His whole point in that was that we have to be careful because we will seek out and hire, in a workplace environment, but also for our committees, people who think, act as we do, right? We have to force ourselves to kind of break out of that mold. So I use that as I moved along my Air Force career, and if I had to hire a vice commander or an operations group commander or whatever, more of a senior level position, I always reminded myself of that. Schwartz is a very cup half full. They used to have an expression, they call it the speed of Schwartz. Let's go, let's get things done, right? But I also had to realize that can be overwhelming. We have to throttle that back sometimes, Doug. But, so I would look for somebody who wasn't necessarily cup half empty, but could be kind of a check on that. That was hard for me to do, because who wants to do that? You want to hire somebody that wants to rev at 100 miles an hour just like you do, right? So that was a great nugget for me as a takeaway throughout my career. And I would suggest that to you too, as you form your committees, whether it's a huge capital campaign committee or something that's just normal everyday work. seek people who are kind of a balance against kind of your thoughts and how you like to do things. And the other thing, too, I had a great mentor as a senior officer in the Air Force who kind of talked about, again, coming back to you got to load shed some of the stuff that you would do. And that's hard to do. And like Angie said, in her role as CEO and president of LSSI, she can't be getting in the weeds of some other things. Why? Because she'll fail at the top level of the duties and responsibilities we expect her to do, right? It was the same thing with me. I had to learn, you got to trust people that they'll get the job done. So when you're leading your committee, give people an opportunity to kind of excel and take care of things. They will. Generally, they'll respond, much more than you ever expected. I had to learn that you see this presentation today, Angie Mollering and her assistant. I would still be sitting in front of my keyboard if I had to do this kind of work, right? But I think I bring some other skills just based on experience that then we can put on these slides and talk about. So that's what I would encourage you to do, just as Angie said. Find your particular skill set and then seek out those that have what you don't have. And that's not just here at church. Many of you do that already in your professional walk through life as well. The other thing that when we talk about hiring people that kind of think and act like us, I said earlier, everybody and everything gets stale. It's very difficult for us at a certain point to look in the mirror and say, somebody else needs to do this job, whatever this job is now. I'll share a quick Air Force story. So when we go to conferences, all of us commanders go out for dinner and we sit around the table and, they'd all complain about this or that and some promotion they didn't get or job. And it hit me one day that some of them have been in their seat for 4 or 5 years. I said, the hardest thing for all of us to do, and generally a type A group, right, is to look at a mirror in the morning and say, I'm stale. It's time for me to go. We need another new idea. Because we've got it all figured out, right? Everybody has it figured out. I would suggest to you on another level, that's another challenge for you to consider. If you've been on a certain committee for a long time, don't hesitate to go to the pastor and say, Pastor Eggle, Pastor Harrington, I think maybe I can help over here now. But let's groom and mentor this other person and come in and fill the seat that I was in. And you build more friendships, relationships, and you got a lot more, it's kind of an overused word, but synergy when you do those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, and Doug is really good about, he's the chair of our governance committee. And so he's always talking about recruiting the next leader. So they're not going to go from being a new board member on LSSI board right to being leader of the board. Hopefully not. I'm not saying we haven't done that at times, but no, that's not our plan. However, we got to be thinking in those ways. And so when you build your committees, when you build your teams, who could eventually in a year from now, especially if it's a long enduring team, who could be on that team, a new leader, somebody maybe sometimes younger, sometimes fresher, they just have more energy, bringing them along and helping them to be able to take the reins. And so that may mean some mentoring or some guiding through the process.
I've got a great example in a church setting for all of you to consider. St. Paul's will be coming up on its 200-year anniversary, and maybe Jim Burning helped my math with him about 15 years, if 1837, yeah, that sounds about right, yeah. So anyhow, 200-year anniversary of that church. And some in the congregation have already said, well, maybe that's an opportunity to do some really special fundraising, special projects. The sanctuary needs some repair, painting, and all those things. That's a huge capital project, correct? But we may want to do that. My charge to them, we have to right now identify that person who's probably about 40 years old, 30s, late 30s, early 40s, who's going to mentor and have them get involved in other campaigns. So at about age 50 to 55, they're that person that's going to be able to lead that very significant campaign. Now that sounds like a lot of years out ahead, but it's tomorrow, right, folks? We've all seen that in our lives, in our career, and in our churches. So I would say we need people right now to help our pastors and staff out, but we also got to be thinking as we're sitting around meeting with people, we're in church, who's that next person that's going to lead us, 10 or 15 years from now? And groom those people. It's generally a younger population. We have to bring those along as well. Angie?
So we've talked about how we build our team and how we look at this a little bit. So now you've got your team, it's built, you just kick back, right? No, the fun is just beginning. So part of it is, and I think Doug has touched on this, because sometimes we're in our groups, we've known each other for years, went to grade school together, went to high school together, I mean, you've got decades. We forget sometimes that people on a team may not all know each other. They might not be as integrated into the church, into the community as we are. And so we need to take some time in our teams for our teams to get to know each other. A team is going to be much more a better team, a sharper team, if people start to feel comfortable. When am I most likely to say, hey, you know what, I need help? I've run into a snag here, is if I trust you and I know you. Right? I'm probably not going to admit that to a group of people I've just met. So, creating some of those times for those to build relationships. And maybe that's where the team starts. Again, we've talked about, a lot of us are very driven, we want to get with it, we want to get on the task. But taking some time, getting the team together for coffee, meeting at a coffee shop. We've got a lot of coffee shops in town. Having breakfast together. You know, those kinds of things. So in a more casual setting, we're getting to know each other. An example of this is, you know, in good Lutheran fashion for years, our board meetings, they started at 4:30, they were done by 6 o'clock. By 6:05, people were looking at their watches. And we got people in and out, and we got our business done. But what we found is board members didn't really know each other because they were coming after work. So we started these things called board retreats, about 4 hours, late afternoon, early evening. When we did our first one, the next board meeting, I had a couple board members come in, and they said, you know, that was really something. You know, I talked to him, I found out he's got 4 kids, I got 4 kids. I've been on the board with him for 3 years. I didn't know how many kids he had, what their names were, what they were doing. That then created more energy and ability to share other things, or ability to have dialogue in the boardroom that was a little more real because people knew each other. So not to skip over that piece, really allow people, and that also then allows people to get to know each other's skill sets. So I know if I'm the one in charge of the 30, you know, and for those of you that do big meals, I know 30 people is not a big meal. I understand that. Some of you have done hundreds. For me, 30 people, that's a big meal to prepare for. I got others than that. Yeah, that's a lot of people. But so I know now who I can call on to assist me because I know people. I've had conversations. I know that Sally just invited somebody over to her house, you know, and she hosts those kind of meals all the time. So it gets those connections going. It also is important to look at each team member freshly, uniquely, with fresh eyes. So we talk about building the scaffolding. Let's get to a couple of examples you have. The team charters. Now, these are just things that I took from LSSI. The one that you will have is the team charter. These are Word documents, and there's somewhere where we're going to have these kinds of things, resources that they can get. There is a place. So you could take this Word document and have at it. Change it for what your needs are. But this is a way to think through. When I'm creating this team, the team sponsor is often that staff person at the church who's gotten you involved. That person who had the vision for calling you as a leader and for setting you on your way. So the team sponsor, and then you being the team leader, and then who are your team members? I love a good purpose statement. We have events, and one of the first things I say when we have an event we're planning, and my marketing person comes to me, my event planner comes to me and says, you know, what do we want to do? What do we want this to look like, our messaging? I said, well, what's our purpose? So I usually tell her to go back and put some thoughts together on what's the purpose. We talk it through. Because if we don't know what the purpose of something is, it's really hard to carry it out. And putting it on paper sometimes forces us to have the conversation. We had a consultant that used to work with us that said, if you can't write it down and draw it, then you don't understand it. So it's a good thing to do that, to take the time. Then what are those standards, objectives? How does the team measure? And performance, okay, in church we don't like to, that's not a good word. We don't like to, it's about people. But what's the outcome? How are we going to know we're successful? One of the things is to say, how often is your team going to meet and what's the duration? Is this a team that you're going to be on for the rest of your life? I mean, you may want to frame that differently, but we joke about that. I mean, LSSI board to get away from us because we got term limits, but once you get off, I may ask you to come back. I mean, you better run and hide. That's all I'm saying. So what are the parameters? People want to know that before they commit to something. Because one of the things people are concerned about is you're going to get me on the team and it's going to be this, and then what happens? 6 months it's going to be this. In a year, I got subcommittees. So helping to define that. And then the other sheet I've given is, this is an example from our Performance and Quality Improvement Committee, which then has had a couple subcommittees. The reason I gave you this is the purpose and philosophy statement. Now, this is a long one. I mean, for the member events, you may not need this long of a purpose and philosophy statement. I mean, you may. But for your capital campaign, you may have a page or two of your purpose and philosophy. Again, we got to define what we're shooting for, or we won't know if we hit it. One of the other things I want to say is, because I know we want to leave time for Q&A, but that creating that harmony and that teamwork on the team is important. And what that does is, so Doug talked about, getting this team going, and as a leader, there are times you may have to dig down in the details a little bit to make sure everybody's on track, or to make sure everybody's okay. I find myself a lot of times in my organization, when somebody tells me they're doing something, so maybe Christy says, hey, in intake, an evaluation, I'm over here doing this. I said, have you talked to Libby? Because it sounds like Libby's doing something like that. Or that conversation just came up last week, and Bethany needs that support as well. So as a leader, I'm making those connections because they may or may not be talking to each other. They're in different buildings, different time frames. So what does success look like? Part of our role is to set expectations, right? Our own expectations. So a lot of times we think success looks like we're going to go from point A to point B, and if we do it right, it's going to be a straight pass. Has anybody ever had that? Occasionally? Certainly not the last few years during COVID and everything else. But it's really messy. And it's okay. It's gonna be messy. So I'm starting here with my team, and we know we have to get here. But in the meantime, there may be adjustments, and there may be rethinking, recharging, looking at things a little differently. So if we plan for the messy and kind of build that in, and it doesn't mean we're not doing it right. If it's messy, it's okay. It's okay. That's why we need a leader.
So as we wrap this part of the formal presentation and talking with Pastor Eggle and Pastor Harrington too, we wanted to make sure we left plenty of time for Q&A because you all have different leadership experiences, and we need to kind of collaborate as a large group here too. But so what are the takeaways today? Need a mission and purpose. Angie's provided some tools you can use so you can adapt to whatever you're trying to do. People need to know what they're doing and where they're going. We want to make sure that we just don't get off on all kinds of different paths. How can we manage that? How can we lead that? Very important to be collaborating with the pastors and the staff. They're the focal point, but not asking them to do our work. Have them do our work for us, right? We can do this stuff. We can do a lot of the heavy lifting of getting people together, scheduling meetings, doing all those kinds of things. Another takeaway, you can't do it all, right? You heard me talk about, it's an expression, I had to load shed a lot of things if I was going to be successful as a commander in the Air Force. I had to be able to rely on people who know how to do PowerPoint a heck of a lot better than Doug does. I had to rely on people who knew finance a lot better. But that, in your role as a leader, bring all those people together. Do the ask. Don't be afraid to ask. People often are flattered when they're asked to do something, right? Oh, you want me to be included? We need your help. We need your help. Don't allow yourself to get stale. Seek other opportunities to serve in the church. We all get kind of cubbyholed, right, into certain areas that we're comfortable with. You got to get out of that comfort zone a little bit. Now, the one thing everybody said, not everybody, but several people said on that sheet of questions was, how do we get people to volunteer? Everybody is so busy, right? Well, first we do the ask. We talked about that. The second thing we do is what I call be good stewards of people's time. We now have the opportunity through electronics, everything from Zoom to email to Slack to whatever method you want to use to stay tied in and communicate with each other. Don't let that be a deterrent. People, I'll use an Air Force example. Oh, Doug, it must have been easy to be a commander in the Air Force because, all you do is tell them, take the hill, and we don't do that in the Air Force. But, whatever, and they'll jump right in. Folks, we've been 40, 50 years into what's called an all-volunteer force, right? They're volunteers. Yeah, I may have them right there in front of me at the time, but they're going to walk with their feet, because we still have to do the same things in the Air Force and the military that you will have to do in your professional walks through life or in a church setting. We got to motivate people. We got to make them feel energized. We got to make them feel part of the team, right? Include everybody. Err to the side of being, I call it inclusive. Now, inclusive has different connotations in this day and age. You know what I mean. Bring in people rather than exclude them, right? And then finally, manage expectations. You know, some of these committees, some of these, the work that's required is not really cool work. You're not building a new building and all that, but it's needed. It helps our pastors. It helps our staff. But kind of set the tone and set the expectations. And again, I'll just end it with this: many hands make light work.
So we have, so that was a very good segue. We have a little video. It's kind of silly, but it kind of shows, first of all, why we need teams. And when we talk about disruption or desperation, threats from the outside, and we got to build our strength internally. So this video kind of, in a humorous way, shows that. Take the bus, but in this, get on the team, right? And help be part of the solution. So questions that you may have that have been on your mind?
The reason that we're using the mic is because this is being recorded, so we want to make sure everybody who watches hears your questions.
Then I don't want to ask. So we've all been on teams, and we have all had a member on the team that maybe wasn't pulling their weight, or that was difficult. How would you help us, deal with those kinds of situations?
Sure, that's a very good question. And talk about managing expectations. That's bound to happen at times. It doesn't mean we're not a good team leader, and it doesn't mean anything's really wrong with that person either. It may not be a good fit. It may be other struggles happening for them. I think probably the best thing is to go directly to them and have a conversation. I think sit with them. Sometimes when you have that's a good coffee time, or to meet outside the church and just have a conversation, because you want them to be successful. And it's okay. It's one of the things we tell people in our organization, this can be a staff person, it can be a volunteer, board member, is that giving people a graceful way out. So many times in churches, especially when people commit to something, we just leave them on that committee or that place forever and ever. And then it's awkward to disengage. And so saying, if this isn't a good time, if this isn't a good fit, that's okay. You can leave. You can, we'll re-engage you in 6 months. We'll check back with you. Or finding another place for them. But I think the direct conversation is better. I know that's hard to do. It's not easy for me to do, and I'm in charge. And as a colonel, it wasn't. I mean, you got the title, you got the position, but it's still a challenge.
And we have a couple examples just with our LSI board, right? Some folks came on the board, and then all of a sudden, life events changed, and everybody wants to say, I can't make it to the meeting, and then they kind of disconnect. But, we've done a good job. We reach out and say, hey, got it, what's going on in your life right now?
Yeah.
Well, this job changed, I got this more. That's fine, so guess what we're going to do? Why don't we re-engage in 6 months or a year? We never let them get away from us, though,
Right.
do we?
No, no.
But anyhow, and come back when it's a better time for you to serve. People are so relieved when we have those conversations, and you do a great job with that, too.
Well, people are relieved, and I think a lot of times people know when it's not working well, and if we just let it go, it also can disrupt the team. So one of the things I try to keep in mind when those really hard conversations is, what is my job? My job is to keep the team moving forward and to make sure we're doing what we need to in our church body. And so that then gives me the courage to have those conversations even though they're hard. So
Don't be afraid to talk to them and just say, it's okay. Reassure people, right? If it's not working for you right now, that's okay.
but that's probably going to happen at some point in one of the teams that you lead. Other questions? She said most people are very reluctant to change the way they've always done things. I don't know, is that an issue? It's human nature. Because change is hard. Change means I have to adjust. Change means I have to think of a new way to do things. So I think, first of all, talking about it. When you're going to change, calling it that. We're gonna change this, and this is going to be a little uncomfortable. Hey, it's uncomfortable for me, too. And I think the other thing is that's why you want to define what the purpose is. So some of you have committees and teams that have been happening forever, may even be very well operating. Maybe you go back if that purpose isn't written down, if some of those things on this the team charter haven't been defined. It's okay to go back and define those after the team has been running. It's okay to circle back because we're going to have to probably, just like we say, there's going to be need to regroup, rebalance, redefine. Doug, you have a thought on that?
I do, yeah. It gets back to the whole thing, everybody and everything gets stale. And it never hurts to, and you may do a review, and I'll use my Air Force as example. Every year we'd get away for a couple of days and do a strategic plan. And okay, what's changed? What do we need to move? Well, a lot of times it wasn't much, right? We probably had a good 95% solution. But there are some things we could tweak, some things we say, that doesn't make any sense anymore. Let's fix that. But in a positive way. Remember, too, if you have all these programs that have more or less worked well, as Angie said, for a number of years, you got to remember, I have another little silly saying I call it, there are always fourth and fifth order effects to everything you do. So you need to be aware of that, and as a good leader, something right in front of you says, this doesn't make sense. But there might be, if you change this, there might be somebody over here, or somebody over there, or another committee that would be affected by that. So you got to kind of think tactically, but think strategically too. Never forget, often there are fourth and fifth order effects to any action, even though it seems so simple at the time. I don't know if that makes sense, but you always got to be thinking beyond just what's in front of you as well, right? Yeah, I'll tell you, I learned that lesson in the Air Force. If I was going to do something with operations, well, guess what? In operations, maintenance would fix our airplanes, right? Now that might affect processes in maintenance. And sometimes it can almost seem numbing, but once you get past it a little bit, it's kind of a challenge. Okay, how can we move everybody forward? And then it brings everybody in collectively to talk about things. And now, in my little example, now maintenance is working with operations. Operations says, I need to do this. And maintenance says, well, hey, here's how we can help. But I will tell you what, if operations went to maintenance and said, this is what we're going to do with our airplanes, right? Yeah.
Well, and up here, the leader sets the tone. I think sharing as a leader, this is going to make me uncomfortable too, changing. And it's, that kind of sets the tone and calling it out that this is going to mean some adjustments, and we'll get through this and we'll figure this out. But I know it's hard. Sometimes you drag people kicking and screaming through it.
Yeah. But Gloria, we kind of answer, I don't know that there's everything's situational to a point, right? You just got to be willing to address it. And the other part, too, that I have it kind of goes along with this, a little saying, far better to ask the question than not know the answer. What I mean by that, how many times have you ever been in a group and there's something that comes up and you think, well, I don't want to ask that question because everybody else probably knows it. I've been a dummy. Yeah, countless times, folks. How many times I've been a dummy? I just raise my hand. I don't get that. Why are we doing that? Then all of a sudden somebody says, well, I didn't either. I'm glad you asked that question. I didn't, and so Tommy and Susie say, well, I'm glad you asked that question. Those are the kinds of things that leaders facilitate. Don't be afraid to ask a question. Don't be afraid. Don't be, I call it the rolling of the eyes, intimidating in many ways. And then people just shut down, right? One of my challenges in the Air Force is to make sure that people weren't afraid to bring stuff to the colonel. And I don't know how many of you served in the military, but people have certain notions about hierarchy, and it's important to a point, but you also have to be able to have clear and open, concise communications. I will tell you, if you understand enlisted corps, officer corps, when senior enlisted, we call them our chiefs. Chiefs aren't afraid to tell the colonel what we need to do to fix things, all right?
If you can flip back to your line,
Oh, yeah.
there's some brilliance in there, and I know you intended it. At the beginning of
I
the
took this
second,
from a consultant.
what's that?
I took this from a consultant. Yeah.
You did good. There's some really key things in there. At the beginning of the curvy line, it actually goes backwards in order to go forwards.
Yes.
And even at the end, the same thing happens. And I think it's really important to recognize
That is
that
a good point.
the chaos in the middle sometimes starts out going where you feel is the wrong direction. And even when you get close to the finish, sometimes you feel like, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't, and then all of a sudden you're there. And I think it's important in a team to recognize
That's
that
excellent.
That's a good point.
all of that change that you were just talking about can actually get you on that trajectory very quickly if you deal with it right away.
No, and I think in the midst of the going backwards, you have to remind yourself, we're going to get this back on track. And I've just gone through and going through some of that in a piece of my organization, and I have to remind myself every day so I don't get completely discouraged. We're going to get there, but now we need to backtrack. I thought people in a certain area were further along, so I gotta backtrack, circle back, make sure that they understand, and then we move forward. But yeah, that's great, Alex. Thanks for pointing that out.
So many churches are aging, and the congregations and things got youth coming in or younger generations. It seems to be a challenge not only to get them into church, but once you get them there, to engage them in a role of leadership. Suggestions on how we can get these younger generations engaged.
Ask, and ask again. That's all I can tell you. Ask, and ask again. And then maybe they'll tell you, no, maybe it's not the right time, but you just got to do the ask. And don't be afraid to do the ask. And remember, too, I know when, Doug Schwartz, I used to be 6'5", I think I shrunk. I was 6'4", Doug Schwartz, I'm joking here a little bit, would go and ask, and my daughter and my wife remind me all the time that I'm getting a hard of hearing, my voice carries, and I need to tone it down. You have to have some we call it SA, situational awareness in the Air Force, some SA of where you're coming from, right? I'm coming from, I don't see myself, I'm 66 years old, but I'm talking to a 30-year-old, and I'm 66-year-old. They have some preconceived notions. So you got to kind of meet them where they're at in their walk, so to speak, and how you can pull them in and explain how they can help. But I know I perhaps a little bit overboard, but ask. You can't. Nothing's going to happen unless you do the ask. You can, again, I'll say again, you can put 40 notes in next Sunday's bulletin, and you're not going to get any help there. If I could jump in, we got a little bit of time. Gloria's question about what do you do when things have always been kind of the same. I thought of another example I used from the Air Force. That was my background, but everybody, Air Force, bureaucratic, military bureaucratic, but it worked. The bureaucracy worked. But in the last 7 to 10 years of my career, we went through kind of a sea change of looking at how we were going to do things in the future. We had to do that for a bunch of reasons. First, the budgets were shrinking all the time. That old adage you might hear, do more with less. We were doing more with less, right? So we had to get smarter about what we had to do. So I know I went to my called Wing Commander's Call and said, tell you what, unless it's directed by law, by Congress, Department of Defense, or our major command, everything's open game, because we had a lot of things that we were doing that were redundant, You know, you can take it down to a church level. There's probably committees that are doing redundant work. I said, let's turn this thing upside down, shake the loose change out, and get after it. Oh my gosh, you talking about, made me think of that too. Young people, ding, 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 they have the ideas. Well, Colonel, this is a pretty dumb idea. Why are we still in it? You're right. Let's fix it. Well, we can do that? Yeah, we can. You know, they're empowered to do that. So, again, we all have responsibilities, and even committees in a church setting have certain, you know, fiduciary responsibilities on all those things. But that doesn't mean that we can't, as I say, you know, kind of turn it upside down, shake the loose change out, you know, and then kind of figure out where you want to go from there. Do the ask. But anyhow, back to my analogy. So our Air Force Chief of Staff, in recognition of how we have to move, he said, accelerate or lose. We have to accelerate things. We have to keep moving. We can't be happy with where we're at. Not as an Air Force, not as a church body, nowhere. We've got to keep moving. And if you have that mindset and kind of that approach, I think it helps you out as well.
And I think the key thing is if you have a younger person engaged, so you go with the willing. I always say that. You start with the willing. And if you have somebody that's a decade, 2, 3, 4 younger, then those of us who are leading, engage them, ask them. Because part of so if you put it in the bulletin, a younger person's probably not just going to sign right up because they're relational, right? They want that contact. They want to know, as you said, ask. They want to know that they're important to this. And it may change where we have to meet. We may need to meet at the coffee shop, even though there's a place in the narthex or there's blank hall, whatever you all have your conference rooms named after somebody in the church or they called it that forever. Well, that's where we start our meetings. Well, that might be the problem because it doesn't have coffee or it doesn't have Wi-Fi or whatever. So I think questioning those kind of things, are there things we can give on? Is it written in the church bylaws or the church constitution you have to start meetings in that room? Probably not. You know, it probably seems like it, and that's just a silly example. But we'll have to think about what do young people need to be part of the church? What do they need?
One of the things leaders need to be are lemonade makers because you're going to run into plenty of lemons. And that means really keeping a clear focus as a leader, knowing that there's going to be some slings and arrows, I know a little bit about that come your direction. Short example, there was a historic, highly loved, highly regarded chapel at one of our universities that was actually ranked number 1 a few weeks ago in basketball, but things happen. Anyway, we were planning to expand the facility. We had already planned the ceremony to initiate that process when I got a phone call from 2 developers who said, you know, that's fine. We're going to blow that corner away, by the way. And your chapel is going to be a tiny little speck in the midst of 2 16-story high-rises. But we'll pay you a high dollar for that piece of property and get you a new one. Well, as you think about that, boy, a lot of memories connected with that old chapel. But it made sense because what is our mission? Our mission is to reach the people of that campus for Christ. That's why we're there. It's not about the building. But boy, for a lot of people, it was about the building. And so the leader has to finally keep pointing out the vision and be willing to pay the price for leadership and move that ball ahead, knowing that it's going to be very, very difficult for a while. It was. And by the way, as a leader, don't necessarily expect, even if your idea works out, to get a lot of accolades. I mean, that's not why you're doing it. That's not why you're doing it. And so maybe people now would say, that's a great idea. I'm really glad the chapel is at a new location. It's better, it's more effective. They're not gonna, and so what was so important a while ago has faded.
Yeah.
But learn to make lemonade because there's plenty of lemons.
Well, and you also touched on something, so we have to continue to question our assumptions because we assume we have to do it this way or be married to a specific thing, and we have to question that. Absolutely. We have to question ourselves.
I just wanted to address reaching younger people. And I think part of it is that you are aware that you really observe the skills in a person. And then before you ask them, affirm that. You can just do simple things like say, hey, I noticed that you're really good at this. And then another time say, you ever thought about, doing this? And then affirm them so that they can, sometimes people don't realize their own skills. Do you know what I mean by that? And so if you affirm the people first, and then you can say, I've noticed this about you, and then you're kind of setting the stage, and they're maybe a little bit more willing to step out and take something on that they wouldn't have thought about before. But those key points about observing first and seeing those skills that you see in somebody, and then ask them to participate where their strengths are. That's a lot easier to say yes to than when you're asked to do something that you don't feel you can do or that you're good at already.
Yeah.
Exactly. Know your people.
Yeah, and I think being direct is important. I say this, our culture, there's so much noise in our culture with social media and all those kinds of things. And I heard a study recently that, I don't know, an amazing percent of the population has their cell phone within an arm's reach 22 hours a day. I actually think it's probably more than that if you sleep by your bed, put it by your bed and use it as your alarm. However, our young people, absolutely. Influencers, TikTok. I joke with my youngest daughter that I'm going to be a TikTok influencer. She says, Mom, I beg you not to set up a TikTok account. Yeah. I think it could be cool, but anyway. But they live and die by that. And so that noise is in their lives constantly. And I think when we're indirect as a church, it gets lost. So yeah, saying, hey, you're important, we want you here, I think is super important. Yeah.
So Doug, thanks for permission to ask a dumb question. I haven't heard one yet, so I'll be that guy. How do you leave gas in the tank for service for God, right? Our daily life, being part of the sandwich generation, might as well open a deli, right? As much lunch meat is keep slapping at us with all the things we have to do, right? How do you leave gas in your personal tank to serve God as a lay leader in your church with your 9 to 5 and your daily life, right?
If I could share just a couple of thoughts, during the time that I was blessed to have the opportunity to do some leadership stuff at St. Paul's, it was busy. I couldn't deny it, but what was interesting to me, and a part of that probably, you are what you were when. I was born baptized, I call it BBC, born baptized, confirmed at St. Paul's. I got to tell you, the school means a lot to me. Share this, modest success I've had in my personal life, I directly attribute, of course, to my parents, but also the foundation and formation I received at St. Paul's Lutheran School during my time K through 8. I'm sure many of you could raise your hand and probably say the same thing if you had a similar experience at your school and your parish. So, and I'll also say this. In my opportunity to serve and live in a bunch of different places all over America, one of the things I would look for, what does the church look like? What does the school setting look like? Folks, and many of you have lived in different areas, but there's nothing like what we have here in Northeast Indiana in terms of just Lutheran grade schools. Goodness, what do we have? Kerry could probably have 12, 14 Lutheran grade schools still in the region, something like that. And there were more than that. When some of us, like my fellow friend Jim Burning and Dan Kramer at St. Paul's, when we were in school at St. Paul's, right? So that really says something. So back to my point. I was busy. You're all busy. You're probably busier than I ever was. But I always was energized by that opportunity to serve. That folks thought, well, Doug, you could be the guy to help be a co-chair of the building committee, or you could be chairman of the voters assembly, or serve on the school board. I derived energy from that, and I enjoyed it. Okay, So it didn't, yeah, sometimes one more meeting is a little bit of drudgery. But there was a time when we all kind of looked forward to going to school board meetings. Now, some of that, of course, was because we were going to the Acme afterwards, but, that's another story. We had that to look forward to. But anyhow, I'm, as I like to say, bloviating a little bit, but I think it's all on how you approach it. It's all on how you turn it, right? It can be a lot of fun, energizing, build a lot of great relationships. I know out of our capital campaign with the school, people I knew, but now I have even closer relationships and friendships with. And I don't know if that helps answer, like you said, at a certain point you got to keep some gas in the tank, right? But just turn it to a positive, let it energize you. And that is also, what's the word, contagious, if you will, too, when people see you walking around. I call it walking around and I took this approach as a commander. I walked around with a smile on my face and a spring in my step. Because the leader doesn't do it, no one else is.
And
I don't know if that helps, yeah.
I think a part of that too is self-reflection. So sometimes we're doers, we're leaders, and we say yes, yes, yes. Are there other things in our life that it's time to put a pause on? I mean, I know you can't put a pause on everything, children, family, those kind of things, super important. But are there other things that we should step out of because now is the time to get more engaged in our church because we know our church needs us and to step out of some other things? Because, and this happens all the time, whether it's work or personally, that self-reflection of where should I be used? And then, that should be committed to prayer also. And I know all of you are praying people, but where is God leading me? And sometimes God is leading me in a direction that I'm not sure I want to go in, but if I'm listening, he's like, I really need you over here.
So you have to have the bulletins and the screens. I know the ask is important, but you have to have the parish notes, the bulletins, the screens. Sure. Is there any verbiage or imagery that is enticing or motivating to people?
Can you say a little more imagery that would
get imagery
in
or
the
verbiage that I could put in the bulletin? We need you, or you might be good at this, or do you have a heart for? These are all things that I use on a regular basis. Is there anything new?
I don't know there's any magic set of words, just what you're doing makes sense.
Yeah.
We need you, exclamation, something an intention getter, right?
I do think asking questions, we have had trouble sometimes getting referrals to certain programs, and it makes sense that people would connect with us. We're like, this makes so much sense, why don't they? I think asking questions, and I don't know what those questions are, but have you been, looking for a place to connect? Or, I don't know, do you want to see church look differently? I mean, you got to be careful what questions you ask if you really want the answers. But something maybe that would spur someone on. And again, I think that individual conversation, I spend a lot of my time connecting with staff and making those connections. And my other leaders will say to me, why are staff telling you this? Like, you're the CEO, they shouldn't be telling. And I'm like, well, I look them in the eye and I say, how are you doing? How's it going? And I think those individual conversations. But yeah, asking questions that kind of, what is it that people want? What are they looking for? I know that's not a great answer, but yes. Okay, one more. Yep.
Around goal setting and accountability. I mean, the boards I've seen over the years, there's a few people. Maybe 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people, and so the use of like committees and task forces, how do the leaders give them realistic and really time-bound goals and accountability? Because sometimes I just see like standing committees, and honestly, everybody's just sitting down.
Or ad hoc turns into standing, right? Yeah. Well, that, Angie wants to be, that goes back to your whole thought about setting a charter and establishing
I think being clear on our expectations and then pulling those out frequently. I think the other thing is, so our board members that are here in the room have heard me say this, so people always want to know how many board committees you have. We have 3 board committees, and we don't have a huge board, but we also don't want people to run around and do committees. If we need something done, like a strategic plan, then we call that a task force, and it's got a start date and an end date.
Yeah.
And I think our problem sometimes is we start things and we just let them keep going because we think we can't, and you're more likely to get volunteers if you've set, hey, this is our start and this is our end. I know you can't always do that, or something I'm not good at, but if you set some term limits and then asking people, you still want to continue to serve. So thank you all. We're going to turn it over.
Wow,
Yeah.
this is unbelievable to be able to sit at your feet today. And one of the things I learned from Robin Dougal, and this I think was borne out today, he said at the end of your presentation, you should always ask, what did you learn today? You heard that from these people. Let's thank Angie and Doug for such a practical session. It's amazing. It's really helpful, and I hope your wheels are turning. We're going to spend the last few minutes today, and you're getting right now an evaluation form we think is very important for us, because as this continues to go out, I want to make sure you understand we are now looking ahead. What are the next steps for iLead? Make sure you have access to one of these, and what I want you to do for the next few minutes, and you knew this would happen, but we're kind of pushing up against it here. I want you to, at least with one other person, kind of talk through and give to us information that will be helpful. So you'll see the questions. What was useful to you? How are you going to implement? What suggestions do you have for us as we look to iLead 2024? Before you do that, I want to really quickly, and there's a reason behind this, I'd like to ask all of the people who served to help plan iLead to stand. So Celine, stand up, and Dennis, stand up. And I'm doing this. Fred Nash, stand up. We got a few others out here. Tim, thank you. These are people at your congregation that you can connect with. As you process what you've heard today, especially, with this kind of abbreviated evaluation, make sure if you have ideas, thoughts, that you connect with either one of your pastors or one of the lay leaders who has stepped up to help provide this kind of training. I want you to take 5 minutes now with at least one other person, talk through, and as much as you are able, fill out these evaluation forms. We want to make sure we get these back before you leave. We will close officially in about 5 minutes, but take those 5 minutes for us. It'll be very helpful. And make sure you're jotting down key words as you talk so it's captured for us.
Check, check.
Okay, it's starting to get quiet. I can see some heads raising from the sheets. If you haven't completed these, please take a moment after we close to do so. And then they don't know I'm going to ask them this, but Sarah Pennekamp and Liz Bijat, would you be at the exit and just collect these completed evaluations? Thank you. I made them hand them out too. So, real quickly, announcement from our host Dan Harrington is that there's still food out there. And what I've learned, both from Robin Dougal and today from Angie, Robin said eat together, Angie said develop relationships. And that's been one of the cool things, to see people. I mean, we can get a lot of this content online, times 1,000, to be together with people and to understand that we're not alone in the task that the Lord has given to us. That's one of the things that has been helpful to me from iLead, and so I'm thanking you for your participation. So you guys are so Lutheran, it's ridiculous. So you have the first 4 rows empty. I guess that's what we do. And the other thing, one of the other things we do is we sing. We really sing well, and this is a beautiful sanctuary, so I'd like to invite you as we close today to sing with me the doxology. Let's stand. And this will be a good sending. And our prayer to the Lord, again, we are very appreciative of your time over these last many weeks. And we continue to lift you up in your leadership in our congregations as God uses us for his forgiving, saving purpose. And let's praise him with these words. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Blessings on your day.